this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, Force Design 2028 launches at the Coast Guard. A summer of acquisition deadlines ahead for the Department of Defense and an audit coming for auditors across the federal government. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Coast Guard says 4 campaigns will comprise its Force Design 2028 effort. The service lists those campaigns as people, organization, contracting and acquisition, and technology. Captain Jonathan Carter, U.S. Coast Guard, is director of the Force Design Implementation Team. Captain, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. How did you and your colleagues determine that these were the 4 campaigns on which you needed to drive Force Design?
Well, they encompass everything that we do in the Coast Guard, Francis, and thank you for this opportunity to be able to discuss it. It's an exciting time in our Coast Guard, and the Commandant says we're operating by a binary star, which is Force Design and reconciliation. And those 2 things have now come together to really transform our Coast Guard. One of the largest transformations in our service since World War II. And when you think about what we do, people, first and foremost. The strength of what we do is in the willingness of our people to put themselves in harm's way. We just saw that this weekend. Contracting and acquisitions. We need to modernize our fleet. We are still operating ships that are 50 years old. Even our newer ships have parts availability issues that keep us tied up to the piers more than we should. And then technology. All of our future concept of operations are going to require technology, and that's a mark we haven't met yet. So the Secretary, the President, and our Commandant have challenged us to do better, and that's what Force Design is going to do.
You've hit on 3 of the 4, and we'll talk about each of those in the time that we have. The other item is organization, and it strikes me that one of the most important pieces of that I read about that fits under that umbrella is a Secretary of the Coast Guard, which the service has never had before.
But we're excited about it, and it's something we've thought about for a long time, and we really mirrored what the Secretary of the Army does, what the Secretary of the Navy does. But I was at DHS in its infancy back in 2003, and it was a big job then, and it's a bigger job now. And so for the Coast Guard to have a senior civilian that is able to integrate across the government, integrate and communicate with industry to be able to help us acquire the capabilities that we need is going to be a huge success in what we're trying to accomplish with Force Design.
You mentioned the emulation of the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, Air Force, and so on. Rear Admiral Dash was on the program, the service's CIO, not too long ago, and talking about his IT modernization effort that will be modeled after what the Navy has done. What makes that a good fit for you to look at what other services have done rather than trying to create it all from scratch?
Well, because when we look at technology, when we look at remote and autonomous systems, those are complex capabilities to bring to our workforce. And so we're similar to other armed forces with that respect. We are creating program executive offices, and that's modeled after the Navy. Admiral Dash will lead one of those. And so the Commandant says if the lifetime sustainment personnel were mirrored up with the acquisitions personnel, the fleet wouldn't look like it does today. It would be more affordable, more capable, be underway more often, and so that's what we're moving to.
How do you integrate the operators into the operations and the delivery on Force Design closer to get the results that you just described?
That's an important question, and I appreciate you asking it because I consider myself an operator. I don't like to think of myself as a beltway guy, but through mission managers, which are also very similar, integrating with the PEOs, we cannot lose that advocacy for our tactical edge operators. And what excites me most about Force Design is even though, take for example, organization, it's a lot of higher level change, it's producing mission-oriented results. Everything that we do under Force Design will be tailored towards mission outcomes and making the jobs of our operators safer and more efficient.
You mentioned people first, and one of the elements of this is more people.
Correct.
What are you going to do to attract those people and to keep the ones that you want to keep in the Guard?
So the Secretary has given us a monumental number to increase our Coast Guard by 15,000 people. I might argue that we need more. It's less about the specific number of people and more about readiness and resiliency. When I'm CO of a cutter and I have a person who shows up who isn't trained because we don't have a training quota, and when they finally do get a training quota, I don't get a person to replace them, that's not readiness. When that individual doesn't have time to spend time with their families before reporting between units, that's not building resiliency across our workforce. So you do that by increasing the number of recruiters, which we're already doing, increasing the number of recruiting stations, and you change the math. You know, how do you incentivize the right places in our workforce to stay longer? The Coast Guard has always done a pretty good job of that, but that's something we're going to have to take a look at moving into the future.
And you speak from experience in that respect, because your last post was a ship commander.
I was a ship commander, and before that I was the chief of Coast Guard enlisted personnel. So I saw firsthand the damage that vacancies can do to readiness and resiliency across the service. And that's why sometimes I look at that 15,000 number and go, is that enough? But it will be a challenge for us to get to that, but it's a challenge that we're willing to accept. How
does your experience in the post before this one inform the way that you approach each of these 4 campaigns? Yeah, no,
great question, and operators live at my heart. And I think the Commandant has challenged us to ensure that everything that we do under force design is tied to an operational outcome. So we do have strategic imperatives, key enablers under the force design execution plan, but each of those will be tied to very specific outcomes where we want to see change, whether it's controlling, securing, and defending the border, maintaining the flow of maritime commerce, or our ability to respond to contingencies. When the country has a bad day, you never know who they're going to call. And we just saw that this weekend with the floods down in Texas. Who would have thought they would have called on the Coast Guard? But they did, and we were able to respond. In the future, whenever contingencies with foreign countries come up, you know, we need to be ready to answer that call, and that's what force design will do.
And Admiral Dash is not the only Coast Guard personnel that's talked about integration with the other services and
Correct.
Using models with the other services. That's become a very important part of the Coast Guard's mission, is not just integration with the other sea services in the United States, but integration with Coast Guards around the world and sea services around the world.
We are very proud to be a part of America's armed forces. And the Secretary has challenged us to be, you know, the greatest, so particularly when it comes to the development and rapid employment of advanced technologies. So being a member of the Joint Force is something we take pride in and something we want to keep, and that includes the interagency writ large whenever we are responding to contingencies.
And Captain Carter, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.